The solicitor offered Eliza two choices: accept £30 and surrender every claim against her father's estate, or take possession of a roofless lighthouse cottage burdened with £42 in unpaid rates. Her brothers expected her to choose the money. Instead, she took the deed. That evening, rain entered through the cottage ceiling, while Eliza examined the papers left inside a warped chart case. She found two coastal surveys dated the same day and signed by her father. The published version showed a straight cliff boundary. His field copy curved around an inlet absent from every official map. Both could not be accurate. Before Eliza could finish comparing the measurements, hoofbeats stopped outside. Her eldest brother had followed her from the solicitor's office, and he demanded every map in the cottage before sunrise. Stephen Marlowe filled the crooked doorway without removing his hat. Rain shone on the shoulders of his black coat. Behind him, the decommissioned lighthouse vanished and returned as clouds crossed the moon. "Those papers belong to Saltmere Hall," he said. Eliza kept one hand on the field survey. "The deed includes the cottage and its contents. It includes rotten furniture and whatever gulls have left in the chimney. Father's surveys are estate records. Then why were they here?" Stephen's mouth tightened. At 35, he had mastered their father's way of pausing, until silence felt like a reprimand. It had worked on Eliza when she was 16 and doing calculations Edmund Marlowe later submitted under his own name. It did not work now. Stephen stepped inside. Water dripped beside his polished boots. "The railway company will survey this headland next week. Private sketches will only create confusion." That was the first useful thing he had said. At the solicitor's office, Stephen had spoken of profitable farms and tenant repairs. He had said nothing about a railway. Charles, their younger brother, had stared at the carpet while Mr. Horace Pell explained that Eliza's £30 would be paid only after she signed away every further claim. She had recognized the trap before she understood its purpose. Now she rolled both maps together. "You may buy them," she said, "after I know what they show. £40 for the papers and the cottage. This morning it was worthless. This morning I was being generous." Wind pushed rain through the open roof. A loose board struck the wall above them. Stephen glanced upward, impatient with a building that refused to collapse at a convenient moment. "The parish will sell this place in 30 days, he said. "You have £9, perhaps 10. Take the money before pride leaves you sleeping in a ditch." Eliza had £9 and 11 shillings. He knew almost exactly how little stood between her and that ditch. She placed the maps in the bottom of the chart case and sat on its lid. "Good night, Stephen." For a moment she thought he might pull her aside. Instead, he leaned close enough for her to smell wet wool and cigar smoke. "Every map," he said quietly, "before sunrise." He left without another word. The hoofbeats receded along the cliff road. Eliza waited until they were gone, then wedged a broken chair beneath the latch. She moved the chart case into the driest corner and opened the field survey again beneath her lamp. The date was the 3rd of June, 1847. Edmund's public copy turned the Saltmere coastline into an almost straight line between the lighthouse and the Dunley Marsh. The field copy bowed inland around a narrow tidal inlet. 3 parallel rows of small rectangles occupied its center. Along the eastern edge, her father had written 4 figures for depths, then crossed out one of them so heavily that the paper had nearly torn. Eliza measured the scale with the dividers she had carried since she was 19. If the field survey was correct, the missing inlet cut nearly 600 yards into land Stephen now claimed as part of Saltmere Hall. She heard a dull vibration beneath the floor. The lamp flame trembled. A second vibration followed, then the faint drag of metal under stone. Eliza knelt and pressed her palm to the flagstones. Cold water moved somewhere below her, although the tide should have been falling away from the point. She looked from the floor to the 2 maps. Where did the missing shore go when the sea withdrew? By daylight, Old Lantern Cottage looked less romantic and more dangerous. Half the western roof had fallen into the kitchen. The eastern chimney leaned far enough to cast a slanted shadow across the wall. Salt had opened the mortar between the stones, and the front window had no glass. Mr. Pell arrived shortly after 8 with Stephen beside him. The solicitor declined to cross the threshold. "Your deed is broad enough to include abandoned household contents," he said. "But Mr. Marlowe maintains that professional papers belong to the general estate. A judge may eventually decide." "After the railway inquiry?" Eliza asked. Pell adjusted his gloves. "I was not instructed about any railway." Stephen watched him too sharply. Eliza stored that reaction with the altered coastline and the sound below the floor. "No papers leave here without an inventory," she said. Stephen gave a small shrug. "Then keep them. Dunley tradesmen have been advised that the cottage has no credit. When the rates fall due, paper will make poor roofing." They drove away. Eliza stood in the road until the carriage passed the bend, then walked 3 miles into Dunley. The village gathered around a narrow quay where brown-sailed fishing boats settled into mud at low water. Mrs. Ada Bell kept the post office in the front half of her chandlery. She was a broad-shouldered widow with iron-gray hair and a pencil tucked above one ear. "Marlowe?" Ada said after Eliza introduced herself. "That name has cost people here enough." Eliza laid 13 shillings on the counter. "I need used sailcloth, lamp oil, nails, rope, 2 panes of the cheapest glass, and anything that will keep rain from a bed." Ada looked at the coins, then at Eliza's damp sleeves. "For old lantern?" "For 1 room of it." The pencil shifted as Ada raised an eyebrow. "Your father surveyed the western marsh in 1859. 12 families lost grazing rights because his line favored Saltmere Hall." Eliza knew the survey. She had copied the bearings at his desk. She had also questioned one angle and been told that land law was not a subject for daughters. "Then I would like to see where he placed it." "Why?" "Because one of his other lines is wrong." Ada studied her for another moment, then pulled a folded piece of sailcloth from beneath the counter. "This has a tear near the edge. I was going to cut it for patches." "Take the whole thing." "I can pay." "You already are." 13 shillings. "And you carry it yourself." Outside, Eliza found Thomas Reed planing a length of oak beside the boatyard. He had been a boatwright before an injury stiffened 2 fingers of his left hand. Now he repaired carts, doors, and whatever boats could pay. She offered him 4 shillings to brace the cottage's eastern room. Thomas did not look up from the timber. "4 shillings won't make that place safe." "It may make 1 room safe. Your father made 1 line on a map and took pasture from my sister. Ask Saltmere Hall for a carpenter." "Saltmere Hall has refused me credit." That made him pause, though only briefly. "Then your brother has more sense than I credited him with." Eliza left before anger spent money she needed for nails. On the return walk, she followed the public coast survey rather than the road. The straight boundary passed through a belt of rushes west of the cottage. At low tide, the marsh should have drained toward the exposed flats. Instead, a thread of clear water emerged from a stone culvert and ran toward the sea with enough force to bend grass along its banks. Eliza tasted a drop from her finger. Fresh. She checked the tide. It had begun to rise. Fresh water should not have been leaving the marsh faster as the sea rose against it. She cleared weeds from the culvert mouth. A rusted chain lay in the channel, trembling with the current. When she tugged it, something answered underground with a slow metallic knock. Eliza released it at once. She set a stake beside the water and marked its height. Then she waited through the afternoon, measuring the flow every quarter hour. The current strengthened while the sea climbed, weakened just before high tide, and stopped entirely as the water turned. It was not a natural spring. Some buried mechanism was draining a reservoir on a cycle separate from the open coast. Before dusk, 2 men carrying railway staffs crossed the marsh. Their leader introduced himself as Gideon Shaw, land agent for the Eastern Counties Coastal Railway Company. "You're standing within the proposed embankment," he told her. "According to which boundary?" He unfolded a clean plan. Its shoreline matched Edmund's published survey exactly. One straight line, no inlet, no culvert. This one, Shaw said. Eliza looked past him toward a row of red and white stakes aimed directly across the hidden drainage channel. Then your plan is incomplete. Shaw gave her the patient expression men used when a woman had offered an opinion in the wrong vocabulary. The company purchased a certified estate survey. From Stephen Marlowe, from the owner of Saltmere Hall. Eliza placed her staff across the culvert. This water is controlled. If you drive an embankment through it without knowing where it begins, the marsh will answer for you. One of the surveyors laughed. Shaw did not. Put your objection in writing, he said. The preliminary inquiry is in 6 days. 6 days? The notice was posted last week. At the post office, Eliza thought. Where Stephen assumed she would never go. The men continued toward the cottage. One drove a stake into the ground above the culvert. The chain below gave another, quiet knock. By the time Eliza reached Old Lantern, rain had begun again. She stretched Ada's sailcloth across the eastern room and set pans beneath the worst leaks. It gave her one dry corner, a narrow bed, and a table for the maps. Beneath the floor, metal moved in the dark. The next morning, Eliza mapped the marsh from higher ground. She drove short stakes at equal intervals, recorded the elevation at each one, and timed the freshwater flow against the tide. By noon, a pattern emerged. The ground south of the culvert sank in a shallow line toward Dunley. It looked solid because rushes had grown over it, but the soil underneath was saturated. A second, firmer ridge curved inland beneath a tangle of gorse. On Edmund's 1,859 survey, that ridge had disappeared beneath the straight estate boundary. Eliza heard wheels before she saw the cart. Thomas Reed was bringing oak from an inland farm. His horse followed the newer marsh track, directly toward the wet ground Eliza had marked. She ran downhill, waving both arms. "Stop!" Thomas pulled the reins. But the loaded cart had already reached the first stake. The left wheel sank to its hub. The mare stumbled against the shaft. "Keep her still," Eliza said. "I had no intention of teaching her to dance." She ignored him and pushed her measuring rod into the ground ahead. It vanished nearly 3 feet before finding resistance. Thomas's humor disappeared. "The old road is there." Eliza pointed toward the gorse-covered ridge. "We unload half the timber, turn the cart on planks, and take the curve. That track hasn't been used in 20 years. The ground under it is higher by 14 inches. Together they freed the wheel. Thomas cut back the gorse while Eliza laid loose boards beneath the cart. The old route held. When they reached firm ground, he looked across the marsh at the line of stakes. "The parish road follows your father's survey. His survey follows a boundary that should not be there." Thomas flexed the stiff fingers of his left hand. "My sister's cow broke a leg in that bog last winter." Eliza could offer no defense that would not sound borrowed from Edmund. "I copied some of his measurements. I did not choose the line. Did you know it was wrong? I knew one angle troubled me. I let him tell me that I did not understand the matter." Thomas looked at her then, not as another Marlowe asking for labor, but as someone who had also paid for Edmund's certainty. He nodded toward the cottage. "Show me the room. 4 shillings is supposed to save." They spent the afternoon removing fallen plaster and bracing the eastern ceiling with 2 lengths of oak Thomas declared too flawed for a boat. He reset the window frame, covered the chimney opening, and helped Eliza stretch the sailcloth beneath the surviving rafters. The work did not make the cottage comfortable. It made one room dry. Before leaving, Thomas noticed the field survey on the table. "Those marks in the inlet," he said. "They're not fence posts. What are they?" He turned the sheet toward the light. "Paired timbers, 3 rows. A vessel would settle between them when the water left. A building berth, a repair cradle perhaps. But no sane boatwright would build one beneath a marsh." They returned to the culvert at low tide with an iron probe. 20 yards inland, The rod struck oak beneath 2 feet of silt. Another timber stood 6 feet away. Eliza measured the interval and followed it north. Each pair appeared exactly where the field survey placed a rectangle. Thomas knelt and scraped wet soil from one exposed edge. The wood was black with age, but thick enough to support a coastal cutter. 3 cradles, he said. And if they were meant to dry, there had to be gates. The missing inlet had not merely existed. Someone had built a tidal dock inside it, then covered the entire structure with earth and a false coastline. At dusk, Eliza returned to the cottage and examined every object that might belong to such a place. Behind a rotted cupboard, she found a brass dial fixed to the wall. Salt and soot obscured its face. Thomas cleaned it with lamp oil until 4 engraved positions appeared. Sea level, upper gate, basin level, lower gate. A narrow hand rested just below sea level. That is no ordinary tide clock, Eliza said. Thomas tapped the rim. No clockwork either. The hand is being pulled from below. They lifted the warped floorboards beside the wall. A brass rod descended through a sleeve in the stone and disappeared beyond reach. The chart case yielded one more clue. Beneath the surveys lay a thin service book bound in cracked leather. Its first legible entry dated from 1806. The pages recorded water levels, hauling loads, and repairs to vessels identified only by number. Upper gate closed at second bell. Lower gate held against spring tide. Cradle 3 received the cutter Resolute. Several pages bore the broad arrow mark used on government property. The final entry, dated November 1815, read, "Dock sealed pending Crown inspection. Plans removed under Order 40. 7. On the inside cover, in Edmund's hand, was a later note. Public boundary must remain as registered until military restriction is lifted. He knew, Eliza said. Thomas leaned against the table. Enough to keep quiet, and enough to leave the cottage separate from the estate. Do you think he meant you to find it? Eliza looked at the broken roof, the debt notice, and the note her father had never shown her while alive. If he did, he chose a cruel way to tell me. The railway stakes advanced the following day. Gideon Shaw's men marked a test trench across the higher ground west of the culvert. Stephen accompanied them in a polished carriage and spoke of jobs, freight, and new markets for Dunlay. At the chandlery, 6 families asked Eliza to mark the old marsh route before more carts became trapped. They did not apologize for distrusting her. She did not ask them to. She spent the morning measuring the ridge and gave Ada a plain sketch for the post office wall. The route crossed no known private field, but it passed over land, the published map assigned to Saltmere Hall. Stephen tore down the sketch within an hour. "You are encouraging trespass," he told Eliza in front of the quay. "I am keeping carts out of a flooded channel. The railway will drain it. They do not know what they are draining." Gideon Shaw approached before Stephen could answer. "The test trench begins at 8 tomorrow morning. If you possess engineering records relevant to safety, I need them." Eliza showed him the service book but withheld the field survey. Shaw read the references to the gates twice. "Where are the plans?" "Removed under Order 47. Stephen laughed softly. "A 40-year-old notebook and buried fence posts. This is what happens when a disappointed woman mistakes inheritance for expertise." Eliza turned to Shaw. "Move the trench 50 yards inland until I find the control point." "On whose authority?" Stephen asked. "On the authority of water moving beneath your railway line." Shaw folded the notebook closed. "I can delay 2 hours, no more. The company engineer arrives tomorrow." That night, the brass hand moved for the first time while Eliza watched. It descended from SEA level toward upper gate. A bell hidden inside the wall gave one muted strike. Beneath the floor, the old chain began to drag. Thomas arrived with a crowbar and lantern. They followed the sound outside. Fresh water poured from the culvert, faster than Eliza had yet measured. A railway stake above the channel leaned, shuddered, and fell into a hollow that opened beneath it. Stone steps descended through the mud. At the bottom stood an iron-bound door marked with a corroded numeral 3. The flow weakened less than an hour before dawn. Thomas cleared the last silt from the hinges, while Eliza compared the service book with the brass dial. If this is cradle 3, the door should open only when the basin is drained, she said. And if the book is wrong, then we get wet. He tested the first hinge with the crowbar. I had hoped your education included a better answer. The dial reached lower gate. The chain stopped. Water in the culvert fell to a trickle. Together they pulled the door inward. Cold air breathed from a passage under the marsh. The walls were brick, not natural stone. Their lower courses shone with damp, but the arched ceiling remained sound. Iron hooks lined one side of the passage. On the other, white marks had been painted at measured heights, each labeled with a number Eliza recognized from the service book. Thomas lifted the lantern. A dockman could read the basin level from here. The passage opened into a chamber directly beneath the cottage. A toothed wheel taller than Eliza stood against the far wall. 2 chains ran from its axle through stone channels, one toward the marsh and one toward the sea. A third, lighter rod rose through the ceiling. The tide dial, Eliza said. The mechanism had been built so the person above could know the water level while workers below operated the gates. A hand winch stood beside the great wheel. Its handles had been removed, but the locking pawl remained engaged. Beyond the chamber, 3 low arches faced the buried inlet. Through them, Eliza saw the dark outlines of the repair cradles. Oak rails descended into silt. The basin between them was wider than the cottage and lighthouse grounds together. Thomas gave a quiet whistle. Enough room for 3 cutters. Whoever hid this buried a working boatyard. They moved carefully. Every 10 feet, Eliza marked their route in chalk. In a dry recess above the old flood line, they found a cabinet with 4 brass labels. Public surveys, private soundings, Order 47, lease and reversion. The first 2 shelves held rolled papers swollen beyond use. The third contained a brass token stamped with a broad arrow and the words Order 471806. Beneath it lay part of an engineering cross-section, showing an outer sea gate, 3 cradles, and a freshwater reservoir behind an upper gate. Eliza understood the strange current at last. At high tide, the sea filled the basin. When the outer gate closed, water from the elevated freshwater reservoir flushed silt through the lower channel. As the basin drained, vessels settled onto the timber cradles for repair. The system had continued to breathe beneath the marsh because pressure still shifted the gates, even after the working handles were removed. A note on the surviving plan explained the blank inlet, basin, gates, and approaches excluded from public charts under Order 47. The next line had torn away. A lower fragment remained. Upon cessation of defensive service, property and papers shall be returned to the lawful holder of old lantern. The 4th shelf was empty. Fresh scratches cut through its dust. A flake of blue sealing wax clung to one corner. Eliza had seen that color on packets in Stephen's study. He took the lease, she said. Can you prove it? Not yet. Thomas looked toward the passage. Then take what we have before he takes the rest. Eliza rolled the cross-section around a dry wooden core and placed the Order 47 token in her coat. At the threshold, she noticed a worn strip on the floor where boots had passed recently. One print held a narrow heel unlike Thomas's work boots or her own. Stephen had known enough to enter the chamber. He had not known enough to repair its machinery. The railway gave him a faster way to profit from land he feared the cottage might control. They emerged at sunrise. Across the marsh, men unloaded picks and shovels beside the railway stakes. Gideon Shaw read the cross-section on the cottage table. He traced the upper reservoir with one finger, then checked the proposed trench. The line crosses here, he said. Yes. Can the gate still hold? I cannot know without inspecting it. Stephen entered without knocking. The company engineer has reduced the trench depth. Work proceeds. Shaw straightened. You told us there were no structures below the marsh. There are no registered structures. Miss Marlowe has found abandoned military debris. Debris that controls water above Dunley, Eliza said. Stephen glanced at the cross-section. His face changed for less than a second. He had seen a fuller version. You stole the reversion packet, Eliza said. Take care. From the cabinet below this cottage. You left your sealing wax. Stephen looked almost amused. Blue wax exists outside Saltmere Hall. Shaw folded the plan. I am stopping the trench until the company engineer examines this. You have no authority to cancel contracted work. Stephen said. I have authority to prevent a flood. The argument followed them outside. Laborers stood waiting beside the marked line. The company engineer, delayed by a broken carriage axle, had not arrived. Stephen produced a signed instruction authorizing a shallow test on land he certified free of waterworks. Shaw read it with open dislike. Half depth, he ordered. Hand tools only. The moment water appears, everyone leaves the trench. Eliza stayed at the edge while the men dug. The first 2 feet held packed clay. The third revealed old gravel. At 4 feet, a laborer's spade struck dressed stone. Stop, Eliza called. A dark line appeared along the stone joint. The earth gave way. Fresh water burst upward, knocking one man against the trench wall. The others scrambled out as the opening widened. Within seconds, the cut became a brown, churning channel aimed down the shallow slope toward Dunley. Shaw seized the fallen man's arm and dragged him clear. No one remained trapped, but the released reservoir carried enough water to flood the lower quay and the cottages behind it. Block it, Stephen shouted. Thomas stared at the volume. There isn't enough timber in the village. Eliza looked toward Old Lantern. The cross-section showed one other route. If the lower sea gate could be opened, the reservoir would discharge through the basin instead of down the landward slope. The mechanism had not been worked by hand for 55 years. She ran. Thomas caught her at the cottage steps. If that lower gate fails, the basin will fill around us. If we leave it closed. Dunley. Floods. They descended through door 3 as water hammered the earth above. Mud streamed down the steps. In the winch chamber, the great wheel trembled against its locking pawl. The removable handles were gone. Thomas fitted the crowbar into one socket, while Eliza checked the cross-section. Upper chain first, she said. We isolate what remains of the reservoir. Then, lower gate. They leaned together. The wheel moved half an inch and stopped. Water forced itself through the brick joints. The chalk marks on the passage disappeared beneath a rising brown line. Thomas shifted the crowbar. His injured hand slipped. Eliza braced her shoulder against the bar. Again, the locking pawl lifted. The upper chain ran with a violent clatter. Somewhere under the marsh, a gate dropped into its seat. The flow through the walls slowed, but the water already released continued toward the village. They turned the wheel the other way for the lower gate. It moved one tooth, then jammed. Eliza spread the cross-section on the ledge. The paper showed a maintenance catch behind the axle. She reached into the narrow gap and found it sealed with rust. Lantern, she said. Thomas held the light while she struck the catch with the Order 47 token. Once. Twice. On the third blow, the rust broke. The wheel spun. The crowbar tore from Thomas's grip and struck the wall. A chain roared through the stone channel. Water rushed beneath them so hard that the chamber floor shook. The lower gate had opened. Outside, the flood changed direction. The released water poured through the buried basin and out toward the sea. Dunley's lower road filled ankle-deep, then stopped rising. Inside the chamber, the old mechanism began to fail. One chain snapped. The loose end struck the ledge and ripped the cross-section from beneath Eliza's hand. It vanished into the dark water. A timber in Cradle 1 broke with a sound like a gunshot. Brick fell from the arch. "Out!" Thomas shouted. The passage to door 3 was already blocked by falling earth. They climbed onto the winch housing as the water reached Eliza's knees. The cross-section had shown a service stair beneath the cottage hearth. Eliza found its outline behind the wheel. Thomas drove the crowbar between 2 stones while she pulled at the iron ring. The sealed panel opened inward, spilling soot and broken mortar onto them. They climbed through the old fireplace just as part of the chamber ceiling collapsed. Outside, villagers formed a line with shovels and sacks along the lower road. Ada stood knee-deep in water, directing them. When she saw Eliza emerge, blackened with soot, she pointed toward the quay. It has stopped. No houses had been lost. The fallen railway laborer had a bruised shoulder, and nothing worse. The marsh, however, had opened in 3 places. One cradle lay broken. The lower gate had torn partly from its hinges, and the original cross-section was gone. Shaw found Eliza beside the culvert. "My report will state that you warned us," he said. Stephen stood several yards away, his boots clean because he had not entered the water. "Your report will also state that she operated condemned machinery," he said. "She has damaged the marsh and endangered every person here." Shaw's expression hardened. "Your instructions started the trench. On land, certified by the registered owner. Her interference caused the structural failure." Eliza understood before he finished. Stephen could not erase the water or the chamber. He could use both to have the cottage declared unsafe. Without access, she could not recover the legal packet or inspect the gates before the railway inquiry. She had saved Dunley. She had also given Stephen the weapon he needed to remove her from Old Lantern Cottage. The parish safety officer arrived before noon. He inspected the cracked chimney, the flooded chamber, and the broken ground around door 3. Stephen accompanied him with Mr. Pell and 2 constables. By 1 o'clock, a red notice had been nailed across the cottage door. No person could enter until a qualified engineer certified the structure. Eliza was allowed 10 minutes to remove clothing and personal effects. The chart case stood open in the eastern room. The published survey remained inside. Edmund's field copy was gone. "Who entered this room?" Eliza asked. The constable looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Marlowe arrived before us to secure the premises." Stephen stood outside speaking to Pell. Eliza carried out the service book, her instruments, and the deed. When she accused Stephen, he did not deny entering. "A safety inspection required access," he said. "You took the field survey. You seem to lose important papers whenever water is near." The cottage door was sealed before she could search the lower shelves. Ada gave her the room above the chandlery. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the quay. Eliza tried to pay. "You can argue after you prevent a railway from burying us," Ada said. By evening, the railway company announced that objections to the coastal route would close in 48 hours. Gideon Shaw had been removed from local supervision pending review of the flood. A new agent would present the company plan at the inquiry. Eliza spread her remaining papers across Ada's kitchen table. The service book proved the dock had existed. The Order 47 token supported military control. The culvert and cradles proved the physical works remained. None of those facts established who owned them after military service ended. The missing lease did. Charles arrived after dark. He had changed from his mourning coat into a plain brown one, as if less expensive cloth might make his visit less offensive. He placed a folded settlement on the table. "Stephen will pay the rates," he said. £60 in addition, and an annuity of £12 a year. "For what?" "You withdraw your railway objection and surrender every paper connected with the cottage." Ada, sorting invoices at the far end of the room, gave a short laugh. Charles reddened. "It is more than Eliza has. That has always been your family's favorite calculation," Ada said. Eliza read the settlement. It transferred not only the cottage, but every right, return, easement, and reversion attached to it. Stephen knew exactly which word mattered. "When did you see the field survey?" she asked Charles. He looked toward the dark window. "On Stephen's desk?" Eliza pressed. "I saw a map after the cottage was sealed. Before that?" Charles shook his head. "Then he took it today. I did not see him take it. You saw it where it could not lawfully be." Charles sat down. "He says the railway will rescue the estate. Father left debts. The farms need drainage. If the company withdraws, tenants may lose work. And if the embankment seals the dock gates? Stephen believes the dock is useless. Stephen believes it can prevent his sale. That is why he stole the map and the lease." Charles pushed the settlement toward her. "Take this. You will be secure." Eliza thought of the £30 offered at Pell's office. Every promise of security required her to surrender the one thing someone else feared she owned. She handed the paper back. "Tell Stephen I will see him at the inquiry." Charles rose, but he did not leave. "I should have spoken at the will reading." "Yes, I thought you would take the money." So did he. After Charles went, Eliza read her deed again. She had studied its boundary language until the words had become shapes. This time, she examined the final lines that Pell had called obsolete formalities. Subject to all rights, returns, and reversions contained in Defense Lease 47, enrolled in County Book 9. The military packet was missing from the cottage, but its enrollment had survived elsewhere. "Where would County Book 9 be kept?" Ada asked. "Norwich." The first train left at 6:15. Thomas met Eliza at the station carrying bread, a flask, and the 4 shillings she had paid him. "You earned those," she said. "I earned 2. The other 2 can buy copies." "Copies of what?" "Whatever proves your brother a liar." The journey to Norwich took nearly 3 hours with stops. From the station they walked to the county record office, where a clerk demanded a search fee of 3 shillings and warned that defense enrollments were poorly indexed. Eliza gave him the exact reference from her deed. County Book 9 was a calfskin volume, large enough to require 2 men to lift. The entry for Defense Lease 47 began in March 1806, when Sir Matthew Marlowe leased Old Lantern Cottage, 68 acres of tidal foreshore, a flushing reservoir, an inlet, and a 3-cradle repair dock, to the Board of Ordnance. The purpose was stated plainly: maintenance of shallow, draft naval vessels assigned to coastal defense. Under a separate security order, the basin and approaches were to be omitted from charts available for public sale. Thomas read that line twice. They erased it so an enemy could not use it, and the public survey never put it back. The clerk found a sealed closure order from 1816. Military service had ended. The board surrendered the property under the lease's reversion clause. All demised foreshore works, gates, appurtenances, and papers shall return to the lawful holder of the keeper's dwelling, known as Old Lantern Cottage, separate from any superior estate or adjoining holding. The wording removed the dock from Saltmere Hall as surely as a wall. A parish tax schedule called the property Old Lantern Dock Lot and recorded its military exemption. Later clerks had copied only the cottage assessment while losing the acreage description. That error explained why the dock had remained invisible even in local accounts. The same file contained engineering drawings, a wage roll, and the design of a shallow draft rescue cutter able to enter the basin at low water. The wage roll carried names Eliza knew from Dunley: Reed, Bell, Crane, Foster. Their grandfathers and great-grandfathers had worked at the hidden yard. The clerk allowed no originals to leave. Eliza spent £1 on certified copies of the lease, closure order, and tax schedule. She copied the engineering notes herself until her hand cramped. On the return train, Thomas examined the rescue cutter. "This hull could still work," he said. "Wider amidships, stronger keel, less sail. First, we keep the basin from becoming a railway foundation. Then we build it? For the first time since the will, Eliza allowed herself to imagine work continuing beyond the next debt notice. Then we build it. They reached Dunley after sunset. Gideon Shaw waited inside Ada's chandlery with a leather case across his knees. "I have been ordered back to London," he said. "Before I go, you should see the company's revised plan." He unrolled a sheet bearing Stephen's signature. The new railway boundary curved around the hidden inlet. It marked the reservoir, both gates, and all three cradles. No public map contained those details. One sounding beside the lower gate read 13 feet. Eliza set Edmund's published survey next to it. The figure was absent. "It came from the stolen field copy," she said. "My father measured 13 feet in 1847. Could the depth still be 13? Shaw asked. "No. I measured 11 before the trench. Silt has accumulated for 24 years. Stephen's plan did more than reveal knowledge of the hidden dock. It copied an outdated error that could only have come from the map removed after the cottage was sealed. Shaw placed his written trench report beside the plan. "I will attend the inquiry if the committee calls me. The company dismissed you, suspended me. There is a difference, and I prefer that my employers discover it before they build a railway on false title." The railway inquiry filled Dunley Assembly Hall. Fishermen stood along the rear wall. Farmers occupied the benches. The railway committee sat behind a long table beneath tall windows streaked with rain. Stephen arrived with Mr. Pell and the replacement land agent. Charles entered alone and chose a seat near the door. On the company plan, the proposed embankment cut across the upper reservoir and followed the edge of the concealed basin. Stephen described it as unused waste ground belonging to Saltmere Hall. He promised freight access, construction wages, and improved drainage. "My sister holds only the cottage walls and a narrow garden," he said. "Her recent activities damaged old drains and endangered the village. Sentiment should not obstruct progress." Eliza waited until the committee chairman invited objections. She began with the 1,806 lease. The certified copy described the cottage, 68 acres, inlet, reservoir, gates, and 3 cradles. The closure order transferred them to the lawful holder of Old Lantern Cottage. Her deed named her as that holder. Pell argued that abandoned military works had merged into the surrounding estate through long occupation. "Then why does Mr. Marlowe's proposed settlement require me to surrender every reversion?" Eliza asked. The chairman requested the document. Charles stood before Stephen could object. "I carried it to my sister," he said. Those were the terms. Pell changed course. He claimed the field survey belonged to Saltmere Hall and showed only an unbuilt proposal. Stephen produced the missing map from his case. He called it one of Edmund Marlowe's estate studies. Eliza saw the fresh red boundary Stephen had drawn around the cottage. He had turned theft into evidence because he believed possession would make his version official. "May I compare that survey with the railway plan?" she asked. The chairman placed both sheets on the table. Eliza pointed to the sounding at the lower gate. 13 feet appears on each. It does not appear on any published survey or military copy before this committee. My current measurement is 11 feet. The replacement agent frowned. Mr. Marlowe supplied the 13-foot figure. "From a survey removed from my cottage after the safety seal was imposed." Stephen leaned forward. "She cannot prove when it left." Gideon Shaw rose from the rear bench. He testified that Stephen had supplied the revised plan after the flood. Shaw had asked where the hidden measurements came from and had received no answer. He then read his report, stating that Eliza warned the company before the test trench and that Stephen's written certification caused work to proceed. Charles was called next. His voice shook at first. "I saw the field survey on Stephen's desk the afternoon the cottage was sealed. I had never seen it at Saltmere Hall before that day." Stephen stared at him. "Think carefully." Charles looked back. "I have. Too late, perhaps, but carefully." Thomas explained how the cradles worked and how opening the lower gate diverted the flood from Dunley. Ada submitted statements from families who had used the older marsh route before Edmund's 1859 boundary removed it from local maps. The broad arrow token connected the chamber to Order 47. The tax schedule supplied the missing property name. Each piece supported another. No single discovery won Eliza's claim. Together they left Stephen nowhere to place his straight boundary without crossing a lease, a physical gate, a tax record, or his own revised plan. The committee adjourned for 40 minutes. When its members returned, the chairman announced that the railway company's purchase option from Saltmere Hall was cancelled. The coastal route was suspended pending a new engineering survey. The county would protect the dock structures until title was formally confirmed. Dunley Parish withdrew the rate sale notice, and the disputed maps and agreements were placed in official custody. The chairman also referred Stephen's removal of the field survey and his land certification for civil investigation. Outside the hall, Stephen caught Eliza beside the steps. "You traded a railway for a broken dock," he said. "When the village wants wages, remind them you gave them mud and old timber. You offered the railway land you knew was mine. You cannot repair it." Eliza looked toward the quay. Thomas stood with the Reed family. Ada had the certified lease under one arm. Gideon Shaw was speaking to two company engineers who had finally decided to listen. "We will see." At low tide, Eliza stood beside the culvert with Thomas and watched workers lift the final red and white post from the marsh. For the first time since the will reading, the missing shore was protected by more than a drawing. Protection, Eliza soon learned, was not the same as possession. It took 11 weeks for the county court to examine the certified lease, the closure order, her father's will, and the boundary surveys. Stephen's solicitor challenged every phrase that might delay judgment, but he could not alter the central fact. When the military lease ended in 1816, the dock, inlet, and 68 acres of foreshore had reverted to the legal holder of Old Lantern Cottage. The court confirmed that Eliza held them all. The parish accounts brought a second correction. More than 30 pounds of the cottage's 42-pound debt had come from marshland, wrongly assessed against Old Lantern after Edmund Marlowe had folded its acreage into the Saltmere estate. The clerk reduced the arrears to 10 pounds and 16 shillings and allowed Eliza 6 months to pay. She paid the first installment with money earned, surveying 2 disputed grazing boundaries for families who had once refused to speak to her. Stephen escaped prison, but not consequence. The railway company cancelled his land agreement and demanded repayment of its survey expenses. The court ordered him to return every paper removed from the cottage and contribute toward repairing the drainage works damaged after Eliza's warning had been ignored. His name remained on Saltmere Hall, but it no longer opened every door in Dunley. The safety order on the cottage was lifted in stages. First, Eliza had to secure the chimney and cover the eastern room with a temporary roof. Only then could inspectors enter the control chamber. Thomas Reed organized the work, hiring men whose family names appeared on the old dock wage roll. Ada Bell kept the accounts at her chandlery and challenged every invoice that seemed a penny too generous. No single payment restored the dock. Stephen's damages repaired part of the lower gate. Fishermen subscribed small sums in exchange for reduced repair fees during the first year. Eliza's surveying work bought slate for the cottage roof. Thomas persuaded 3 boat owners to pay advances for cradle space, and those advances purchased iron fittings for the winch. They drained one chamber at a time. Cradle 1 remained too damaged to use, so they braced it and left it for the following year. Cradle 2 was cleared of silt and fitted with new oak blocks. Cradle 3 needed only its rails straightened and its hauling chain replaced. By February, the old brass indicator inside the cottage again moved accurately between SEA level, upper gate, and basin level. Eliza registered a small cooperative society in Norwich and granted it a working lease over the dock. She retained the freehold, but the boat rights, laborers, and fishing families held shares in the business they were rebuilding. The arrangement surprised those who had expected her either to sell the shore or rule it as Stephen had ruled Saltmere. "I inherited the ground," she told Thomas. "That does not mean I made it useful alone." The old marsh road became a recorded public way once more. Children carried lunches along it to their fathers and mothers working at the cradles. Ada opened a small supply room near the dock entrance. Eliza converted the cottage's dry eastern room into a survey office, where ship captains brought damaged charts and fishermen paid her to mark channels that shifted after winter tides. Charles came twice before she allowed him inside. On his first visit, he returned a box of their father's field notebooks that Stephen had stored at the hall. On his second, he brought no papers and offered no defense. He simply stood beneath the repaired roof and admitted that remaining silent had once seemed easier than opposing his brother. "It was easier," Eliza said. "For you." He accepted the words without asking her to soften them. After that, he began helping her identify Edmund's unlabeled surveys. Forgiveness did not arrive as a single gesture, but by spring Charles could sit at her table without either of them pretending the past had vanished. Among Edmund's notebooks, Eliza found no confession and no tender explanation. He had known what the cottage carried. Yet, he had hidden the truth behind a deed and allowed his sons to call the inheritance worthless. Whatever he had intended, he had left Eliza to risk ruin before she could claim it. She placed his field survey in a glazed case beside the published version. Beneath them, she displayed her own corrected plan, showing the inlet, reservoir, gates, cradles, and safe approaches. Visitors could see exactly how a coastline had been erased and how measurement had restored it. In May, the fishing boat Mercy became the first vessel hauled onto Cradle 3 in more than 50 years. Thomas replaced 6 warped planks below her waterline. When the repaired boat slid back toward the inlet, the entire village seemed to gather along the dock wall. Work then began on a shallow draft rescue boat adapted from the military design found in the archive. Thomas strengthened its hull for the Norfolk coast, while Eliza recalculated its load line and turning depth. Every family named on the old wage roll contributed labor, timber, rope, or coin. At the launching, Eliza did not stand apart as the daughter who had been given the lesser inheritance. She stood beside Ada, Thomas, Charles, and the dock workers as the new boat entered the basin. Above them, the brass indicator passed basin level with a quiet click. Once, that movement had warned of something hidden beneath a ruined cottage. Now Thomas called the tide, Ada opened the account book, and the workers at the cradles took their places. The missing shore had ceased to be evidence. It had become a living place,